Welcome, everybody. This is Avoiding the Addiction Affliction, brought to you by Westwards Consulting and the Kenosha County Substance Use Disorder Coalition. I'm Mike McGowan. Life one, life two. That's the way someone I spoke to a while back told me that they looked at their own life after getting help for substance use disorder. Well, how do you draw the line and start over? And what about those around you? My guest today will share her story and her work to help others turn their life around. Stephanie Short is a certified peer specialist and recovery coach, as well as a community impact coordinator for health with the United Way of Door County, Wisconsin. She is also the owner of Asaris Wellness Services. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hello.
I laughed because Asaris, for those of you listening, is spelled Esares. And I asked Stephanie before we started, what does it mean? And she said, it's my initials. And I just spelled it out and I started laughing. So I thought it was clever. It was great.
Yeah, I like those clever little things. I mean, it just stuck out to me, to do it like that instead of having just all capital letters of my initials. I'm like, well, I'll just spell it out. And
Yeah.
that's how that happened.
Well, I went with the all capitals for my business. So there you go. I could have picked something that somebody would Google. And Stephanie, let's just get to it. You're recovering. How long?
I have almost 6 years.
Oh,
April,
congratulations.
yeah, April 1st is my sober day.
April Fool's Day.
It is, yep. I was arrested on March 31st.
Yeah.
So the following days was my day one.
When you were arrested, did you go in or did they
So
release you?
nope, I went in and I didn't get out for almost 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing says time to get sober than spending time in jail, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the beginnings. When did your using start?
So my using started probably a little more regularly when I was about 12 years old. Growing up in northern Door County and in the environment that I was in, we spent a lot of time in bars and stuff. So it's like taking little sips of the parents' drink, those types of things happen. Got caught smoking, at a young age, but it all really started when I was about 12 years old.
Well,
And that
okay.
was smoking, drinking, and then I had tried marijuana
At 12
at 12.
with other 12-year-olds?
Yeah, yeah. At that age, with the drinking, it was, at least in our family, acceptable to drink at like family functions, which I found out isn't really normal, later
Well,
in life.
but we've talked about that here. And, we're obviously recording this in Wisconsin, even though it goes out all over the place. And for those of you who don't live here, we have a different culture, right? What Stephanie just said, taking sips off your parents' drink. When I go to other places, they look at me like, what? You did what? Not every culture does that.
Mm-mm. No, no, not at all. Yeah, Wisconsin they're a league of their own for sure. So
Well,
yeah, that was definitely, just like us being in bars when we were kids, our parents would bring us,
yeah.
grandparents would bring us, and we hang out there all day, not knowing that, in most other places, kids hanging out at the bar all day is just not normal, I guess.
Well, 12 is like sixth grade. So at what point did it start to escalate where it was like, uh-oh,
So when I started working actually at 14, it was more than became like every weekend would work, found friends that were a little older than me because I didn't have a lot of friends really growing up. And then, at 14, I started hanging out with, I always call them like the rockers because I love rock music and all that. And then I found a group of friends that liked the same stuff. And then we would party every weekend and drinking and smoking pot, working. And it was like a weekend thing till probably the summer that I turned 16. Then it started to become every day.
hmm.
And it escalated like really quick, smoking pot, drinking, running away from home, quit my job, obviously, and then started doing other things like Ritalin, Adderall. It didn't take long for me to start doing cocaine. At this point, I wasn't ever home. And then smoking crack, actually. around the age 16 into 17. So, yeah, it didn't take long. And I was drinking and doing drugs on a daily basis,
Were
probably until I was about 19.
were you able to make it through high school?
No, I dropped out my beginning of my junior year.
How do you
So,
do that? Aren't there laws? How did you do that?
well, I mean, it was yeah, I thought there were. So I think I got two truancy tickets my entire junior year before my mom pulled me out and tried to put me like in like homeschooling. I just didn't do any of it and I just kept running away. Nothing was ever done, honestly, which when I think about it now, usually like I thought, you know, truancy tickets would come more often, and I only got two for an entire year. And no involvement of, like CPS or social workers or cops, probation, like now when I look at it, I'm like, man, I knew a lot of kids that they put them in like an alternative school, like all this that never happened for me. I always say that I kind of like slipped through the cracks. I even got busted with marijuana at 16 with a possession and paraphernalia charge and no involvement with like, juvenile probation or any of those things. Just got a fine and that was it.
That makes what you've accomplished since then all the more remarkable, actually.
Yeah, I look back and I'm like, man, I just really skated by, under the radar for quite a long time. Even though I did have involvement with the police, it never really went further than that until I was about 19 years old. And then I got my first charges for theft of movable property for breaking into cars. And at
Mm.
this time, and I knew I was, but I was pregnant. I was like a couple months pregnant and then did my first time in jail. But when I got pregnant, so I went from 16 to 19, drinking and partying every day, and I started selling drugs, just nothing big, just to support my own habit. So I
Yep.
wasn't really working, doing anything other than partying pretty much all the time. Like I had jobs, but I would always lose them because of partying. And so when I got pregnant, I started getting sick while I was
Mm.
drinking, and then that's how I knew I was pregnant. So I always say that getting pregnant, like getting sick from being pregnant was the best thing that ever happened to me because I don't know if I would have stopped drinking if I didn't get violently ill from it.
When you ended up giving, so you quit for the rest of your pregnancy?
Hmm.
Did you go back to using right away?
Drinking, yeah, I mean, yeah, I went back to using pretty much right away within a week, I think. I actually was going to give my daughter up for adoption and after I had her and she actually was in foster care for a few days and I'm like, I don't want to do this, I want her back. So I
Mm.
went to the, adoption people or whatever and because she was in foster care until the adoption went through and I'm like, I don't want to do this, I want to have my daughter back. So I ended up keeping her. And my daughter knows about this. Like me and her are really close. We have a really great relationship. She's really glad that her name is not Rachel. Because that's what it was going to be if she was adopted. Um,
Oh, there you go.
yeah. So, I wanted to be a good mom. I wanted to do all those things and I just couldn't, the drinking and doing drugs just overcame everything, I ended up going back to, just full blown using. There was a time where, like, because I was on probation, I went on the run. My mom had my daughter, and there was a lot of things that happened. I went to treatment for the first time when I was 20 years old. And when I first went in, I did it because so I didn't get revocated after they caught me for being on the run for 8 months.
Yep.
And I was there and I'm there with a lot of alcoholics and drug addicts, but I was there for alcohol. And I'm like, how can I be an alcoholic? I'm not even old enough to go to the bar and drink.
Mm.
In my mind, that was the narrative. And I barely made it through. I made it through, but I barely did. And I think I stayed sober for about a month and went back to drinking and using. Yeah, it was a long road of, I just couldn't figure out why I couldn't stay sober. I tried. I just didn't realize that just being sober wasn't enough at that point.
Mhm.
One of the things that stuck out to me, because they say every time you go to treatment, it's never a failure if you go back to using,
Right.
because you always learn. And I
Right.
did. And I didn't really understand it. And it was way too overwhelming to think about back then. But when I got arrested this last time and really started my journey, there was somebody in my very first AA meeting that said that you have to put as much into your recovery as you did your use. And I was like, I'm like, I would have to live, breathe, eat, sleep, recovery, and work. Like, that would have to be my job because that's literally what my addiction was, is I morning to night till sometimes I wouldn't even roll out of bed yet. I'd still be like laying down and using, or drinking warm beer next to me type
Mm.
stuff, or warm glass of vodka, whatever it may be. And and then I was like wasn't like ever like a big time drug dealer, but how I maintained, that's how I supported my habit. So I'm like, I would literally, my entire life would have to encompass my recovery. And so it was really overwhelming for a 20-year-old to think about that.
Well, and for those people who are not just listening to this, but watching this on YouTube, I'm sure they're like, well, what are we talking about here? Because I've said this to you before, you don't look your age. So you used from 12 until the age of
37.
37. So that's a long time. So we're talking 20. You had another 17 years of roller coaster here, right?
Mm-hmm. A lot of different drugs too. I always say that when I look back at it, that I trended with drug trends
Mm,
all the way up until 2019 when I got arrested. And so back in the mid-ish late 90s, it was coke and crack. And then in the 2000s, I have a severe knee damage and have had two ACL replacements and a couple other surgeries. So I ended up addicted to opiates for quite a long time. So that was from 2004 till 2011. And then I was in and out of trouble at 2011. I had caught some pretty, my first felonies and stuff. And in 2011, I was switching out of the opiates and wasn't doing that, but it kind of that area, the 2011, 2012, that's when that, what do they call it, the Pepsi spice,
hmm.
the K2,
Yep.
and then the bath salts. So I was like, I even did that for a little bit, and then drinking was always a real problem, like in and out of drinking. And then it was heroin. I started doing heroin at about 2013, 2014, and then kind of I got got out of that 2015-ish area, and then went to then it was like Molly, drinking and Molly and some hallucinogenics. And then it eventually, when I quit drinking, because I almost died from alcohol withdrawals in 2000, I think it was 2018 or 2017. I almost died. It was a really horrible experience. And I swore that I was never going to touch alcohol again. And I was actually trying to get myself into AODA, and I had a friend call me out of nowhere and was like, "Hey, I need your help with something. Can you stop over?" And I'm like, "Yeah, just give me a minute. I'm setting up an AODA assessment because I just quit drinking, and I'm like, I don't ever want to do that again because it was like I said, I should have went to the hospital because I was hallucinating and having seizures and all kinds of stuff, and I just wanted the help." And when I left that from setting up an appointment, I went over to my friend's house and she had a bunch of methamphetamine. I was like, "I really need your help getting rid of this." And she's like, "Because if I don't get rid of this and get the monies to," and it was like some biker gang that they were going to kill her friend. So I'm like, "Okay." And it just happened, which was really weird how this worked out, is that I called up a friend of mine who I had previously used to live with, and and I was just like, hey, I've never done this before, but I need to get rid of this meth. Like, can you help me? And it ended up being a controlled buy. He ended up he ended up setting me up, and along with like two other times, but I didn't know at this time I was already under investigation from charges, from that they
Wow.
were investigating me on from 2 years prior. But I kept going to jail, like, getting in trouble and going to jail anyway. So that's how that started. And I didn't I was always against shooting up. Shooting up was like something I would never do. And then I did it in 2015. And then there was just a period of time where I did it. Um, and then with Molly was my first time. I shot up Molly. I don't know why. And then it was heroin for a little bit, but then I stopped. And then I started using meth, and then I became a pretty hardcore IV drug user at, 34 years old, 35 years old, first time ever really experiencing that. And the rest speaks for itself. I mean, I had some controlled buys, and I was doing like this meth. I ended up catching charges, quite a few charges through this time, and it ultimately landed me in prison. And it's funny that your podcast is you're out of Kenosha.
Well, that's who's one of the people who sponsors it. Yes.
Oh, the one of the people who sponsors it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was out on bond for my delivery charges. I got bailed out from because I got 4 delivery charges in Door County. And when I got bailed out, I was like, I'm gonna stay clean. And then that didn't happen. I think I lasted a few weeks and went right back to meth. And then I started selling, and I started kind of selling on a large scale. And I was actually in Kenosha visiting my daughter. And And I always say it saved my life because I was down there. I was gonna pick up a bunch of drugs after I left my daughter, but I had actually a full needle of what I thought was methamphetamine. And when they they were suspecting me of that I was going to shoplift from Shopko, so they called the cops while I was in the store. And the cops like came and they went through my stuff and realized that I didn't steal anything, but they were already in my car outside with drug dogs. And I was like, "Oh man, I'm going to prison." Like my heart dropped. I'm like, I'm not getting out, because I already had an open case. And they're like telling me that they found methamphetamine, but then they're also saying that there was heroin in my car. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like,
Mhm.
I don't have any heroin. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And what ended up happening is that when they tested, I had several biggies. When they tested it, actually came up positive for fentanyl. And I actually had a full needle of some of this stuff. And what I thought was a needle full of meth, it was actually mostly fentanyl. So if I wouldn't have gotten arrested, I would have died.
Wow.
I strongly 100% firmly believe that. So that goes along, like when that happened, I was just like, oh my God, what if, I would have sold that to somebody and they would have died, the stuff that I had for me that actually what I thought was meth wasn't, I mean it could have went so many different ways, and I always it by God's grace it went exactly the way that it was supposed to.
I thought,
um
we just had a couple of guys on a couple of weeks ago who essentially said almost the same thing. Like, thank goodness I stopped doing what I was doing before the fentanyl rage uh, epidemic kicked in.
mhm.
For those of you listening too, Stephanie's dropped a couple things. Molly is ecstasy and bath salts is mescacinone. So, you you were skating along the ridge all the way along, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So did you then, when you went to prison, well, you said already that was your sobriety date, right?
Mhm. Yeah, when I
So,
got locked up and I got arrested in Kenosha, and I knew the only reason I was down there was to see my daughter. My daughter was living down there with her dad. Never been to Kenosha in my life, so I literally didn't know one person. And when I went in, no contact with anybody from the outside world pretty much that entire time. And I was there for almost for 8 months. I had to take a long, hard look at myself. I mean, and that, I mean, as much as it was horrible, it was the best thing that could ever happen to me. One, because I had
Hmm.
no outside distractions. I wasn't calling people and people weren't visiting me. I was so sad. I did a lot of reflecting on my life and like, how did I get here? And then two, and I will always rave about how this was such a huge impact on my recovery, was Kenosha had this program. I don't know if they're still doing it at the detention center, but it was called the Living Free program. So when I got accepted into that program and went over to the detention center, essentially we were in classes. It wasn't treatment, can't call it treatment, but we were doing a lot of classes, like 30 hours a week, I think, 28 hours a week. Something about right? Maybe 25. Anyway, we were in classes Monday through Friday, and we were doing everything from AUDA, women in recovery, job readiness, parenting classes, sexual assault class. We were in a domestic violence class, codependency class, like, and I did that for 12 weeks, and it made the hugest impact on my life, and it just kind of prepared me for what I went through when I went to prison. Because I still went to prison, even though I'm all like, I was really trying not to, but they're all like,
Yeah.
you know, but still, that was a blessing in disguise too, honestly, for me. Um,
Well,
that
did you get your GED in prison then, or how did, because
No,
you,
so I got my GED at some point when I went to county jail in Door County here. I think it was like 2012 or 2013. The incentive was is if I completed classes and I completed the tests while I was in jail through the jail, they took time
there you go.
off my sentence. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna do I ended up getting like 30 days off my sentence, I think, for completing my HSED in prison or in jail. So that was pretty awesome that I got to do that.
Well, and
Um,
then when you got out of prison, eh, eh, there's that time, right, where, okay, do you trust yourself? Because now, nobody's telling you when to go to bed, so
yeah.
how long before you were able to say, I feel fairly strong in my recovery?
I honestly think right away. I think I
Hmm.
came out just guns blazing, like I got this, that nothing was ever gonna, like deter me. Was it really overwhelming when I got out? Yes. Nothing really prepares you for the overstimulation of what it's like to get out, whether it's jail, prison, treatment. That getting out, even though it's like, some of it's good anxiety, it's still overwhelming, and I feel like as people who have suffered with addiction, being overstimulated is a very hard sometimes
Hmm.
to deal with. But when I was locked up, I first worked on like my spiritual health and my emotional health. And then I started working out when I went to prison, like, and I was working out probably 6 days a week, and I got back into running. I actually did a boot camp program to get out of prison early. So when I got out, that was probably my hugest coping mechanism was working out. Like I ran so much the first couple months that I
Awesome.
got out. Yeah. And because people ask me, they're like, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? I'm like, I ran a lot. I ran and I worked out a lot because I didn't know what to do with, I felt like I was gonna explode from the inside out, you know? So I needed to do something with that energy. But I think honestly, I don't know what was so different about this time than any other time when I got out and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna stay clean. I think it's just everything that I learned and really not caring, how other people were all like, oh, let's hang out. I'm like, no, not a good idea. I learned to be very comfortable alone, especially going through that much time in jail, essentially by myself, being
I
in my
think
own head
I
was
think that's
really,
one of the keys, Stephanie. I think you just hit on something. Being comfortable by yourself, I think it's a huge thing, isn't it?
it is.
How'd you get over the guilt and the shame and, what'd you say to your daughter and all that sort of stuff?
So how did I get over it?
Or cope with it?
Cope with it. I cried a lot. I cried a lot the first, few months that I was in. And I think a lot of it, the crying and because I'm not like that. I wasn't that type of person where I would cry all the time, but I did a lot. And I think it was because I just knew that I was never going back to that life, that I genuinely was not going to be the same person anymore. So I was kind of mourning that person. So separating who I knew really was and who I was going to turn into helped with that guilt and that shame because I had to praise that woman that got me from point A to point B. Like, was it the best? Obviously not. Did I screw up a lot? Yes. But I survived that, so like just, you know, the forgiveness factor of myself I think was the really big thing, regardless of everything else that happened, that I had to forgive myself no matter
Yeah.
what, or I was never going to make it.
Well, you talk in your coaching, you talk about integrating the 8 dimensions of wellness. You just hit on
Mhm.
a couple of them. Talk about that a little bit.
So the 8 dimensions of wellness there's occupational, financial, physical, mental, environmental, social, spiritual, and why am I always missing the last one? Physical, physical wellness. So the 8 dimensions of wellness, is more of a holistic approach. So let's say emotionally, you're not doing so well, like the other dimensions are going to suffer if one of them is really suffering,
Right.
you know, and so that's why I kind of focus on that as like with my coaching and my peer support because I use a visual and I'm all like, what are you doing well in each of these? Because I like to start out off with what do you think you're doing well in each of these dimensions? Like kind of build up a little bit before, because a lot of people can point out everything that they're doing
Wrong.
wrong or what's wrong with them. It's so hard for people to point out what is going good. And that's where I like try to start with that. And then also because it's person centered, I'm like, well, where do you want to work on? I could, anybody could tell you what they think you should work on, but ultimately, what are you comfortable with working on first? Where do you want to start? Because when you start strengthening the other ones, and even if some of them of the other dimensions aren't doing so well, you use the strength that you have with the other dimensions to help build the ones that maybe, not doing so well in. So, and I just like that approach so much because you can put your focus where you want to, essentially. I don't know. I just like it. And that's where I did, with my school as a wellness and health promotions is that's what we follow. And then that's also the same as SAMHSA.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they go off of too, and I've done a lot of research on it. I'm like, "Yeah, this is perfect," and it's really neat. I really like it. My clients get to focus on what they wanna focus on.
Yeah. For instance, if you wake up in the morning and you're living within your means, right? And then
Mhm.
take a walk, right? And you're thinking about your life and meditating on it, you're hitting like most of them just in that first hour.
Mhm.
But like you were saying, if you're living beyond your means, everything else is going to suffer. So
Yep.
just one of the areas will rock the others. Well, when you, isn't it hard to separate the personal from the business?
Sometimes. I really follow that what that one person said to me, in that AA meeting back when I was 20 years old, that, you have to put as much into your recovery as you do, you know, as you did your use. So, I mean, I kind of live, breathe, eat, work my recovery. My job is recovery. I help others with their recovery. And then mine is obviously very important. I mean, because so good with being alone, I don't need to be around people. Like, I just spent this whole weekend sitting at home, chilling, supposed to do cleaning. My house didn't get clean, but I made some really good food, but that's that's my self-care, but I did. I just laid around all weekend in my pajamas. It was great. So I do have a lot of self-care. I also love kayaking and running and working out. I still do that. I do have a lot of knee issues, which has been kind of a struggle because I was running a lot and now I haven't been able to run for quite a few months because now my knee is just totally shot. I'm actually going in for a knee replacement consultation in 2 days. But, I just take things as they come and just kind of let it come in and release, and I find other alternatives. And, I love spending time with my kids and building those relationships back. I don't know, I feel like I'm really good at time management, you
Well,
know.
yeah, you managed to not clean, so good for you.
Yeah.
Well, you work for your own Osiris, right? And then
Yep.
also for the United Way of Door County as community impact coordinator. But you said your goal is to make a meaningful impact. Do you see it happening?
Yes. There are struggles like always, So coming into this role with contracting with United Way is that it's less of like what I do. It's completely opposite of what I do in my business because my business is peer to peer, person to person. It's very, um, like you're working directly with people and making impact on that personal level. Whereas doing stuff with United Way, it's, the community as a whole. Like, so it's an adjustment. I'm learning and I feel like I'm not learning fast enough, but that's just who I am. Amy, my director, says I'm doing great. So it's definitely different, but I love it because just like, for me, just like the 8 dimensions, I'm doing way different approaches, like on a, small scale, which isn't small. I think working one on one is not small scale, but that's, just like one person. Whereas working United Way is doing community
Mhm.
based things. And I love it. And I love the learning experience. I'm about to write my first grant, which is intimidating, but I got a lot of support here. So they're going to help me with that,
Awesome.
and it's really just building that up because now I know what it is on a personal level. Now I'm going to know what it's like on a community level. And I'd like to be able to combine all that to really make that huge impact, not just here, but, everywhere.
You know,
I like
the
doing this podcast. I like doing this stuff. I'm hoping to be able to do conferences and do breakout rooms and be a public speaker is ultimately my goal.
well, we'll do another one.
Yeah. Love to.
Well, your joy and your recovery shows in your face. And yeah, that's awesome. That's a great place to end this. This is the way it happens. Those of you who have been listening, every story is unique, but they all intersect, Stephanie. There's moments where everybody gets that epiphany who recovers, and I'm just glad you're still with us. As always, we'll put links to Stephanie's business in the blurb for the podcast. We're so grateful you had the opportunity to talk to us today. Thanks, Steph.
No, thank you. I really loved it a lot.
And for those of you listening, you're welcome to join us anytime you're able. And until we see you again, please stay safe and live well.